over 20 years, I've been going around the country quoting my favorite definition of leadership. Leadership is disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. And this is actually the quote from Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky. Actually, Marty said this in an article. And I always say to people, this is what tells us we're not crazy. Because what we started realizing is that whatever the leadership we stepped into, whether we were appointed to something or we took on a role or people voted us into something or we just said yes, like the last really good day that everybody was cheering for you was the day you said yes. And partly that's because of the work of leadership that you have to do. That everything in adaptive leadership particularly is really about transformation. It's energizing a community of people toward their own transformation. And transformation is hard. People resist it. What people want of you as a leader is for you to solve their problems for them. What we are called to do is be part of transforming them so they can face their greatest challenges and thrive. So our company, our mission statement is helping faith leaders thrive as change leaders. Like we are, I was explaining last night to Rick that we're a formation company. What we do is we believe that the development of adaptive capacity, the capacity to do this work, to wisely apply your DNA to a changing world in such a way that you and your organization thrives, to have that adaptive capacity happens while you're doing adaptive work. You can't learn this in a classroom. Says the guy who spends most of my time talking to people in classrooms. It's like you don't learn it from reading books either, and I spend a lot of my time reading books. You actually learn it most by doing it. And the key thing that you're learning is that it's in all of the hard stuff. Which means that no matter what your role is, you really are the chief disappointment officer. That really is your job wherever you go. And mostly it's because the most painful question you have to face is, what are the canoes? What got you here won't take you there, but what got you here was really, really important. It got us here. Canoes represent the things we're going to have to drop. So if you think about this, Meriwether Lewis and his crew of scout team from the Corps of Discovery take a sip out of this little spring, and they walk up the side of the Lemhi Pass. And if you ever have a chance to go visit it, you can go there. It's a national monument site. You can drive up there, literally put your feet on each side of the spring the way the Corps of Discovery guys did and exulted that they had conquered the mighty Missouri. You can actually start where they are, walk up the side, and see that pass. And you'll look at it and you'll go, it looks like another nice view that you have in the West. And not realize that nobody of a European descent had ever seen this before. They were experts to this moment. And at that moment, they were lost. I mean, literally, think about this. Dayton Duncan said they knew less about the American West than Neil Armstrong knew about the moon when he stepped on the moon. Neil Armstrong had seen pictures of the moon. And if you read the men's journals, they have stuff like they wondered whether or not when they got to the West, they would find that that's where all the dinosaurs were being kept. Like they had no understanding of what they were going into. So imagine if you think you've come on this trip to discover the American West and the water route, and that you've come because you're a canoeer. And they built their canoes with their bare hands. They even invented a boat. In St. Charles, Missouri, you can go to the Lewis and Clark exhibit, and you'll see a boat they invented. They are so good at water. There's one of my favorite scenes. It doesn't show up in any of my books, but it shows up in Stephen Ambrose. One of my favorite scenes is when they finally get on the other side and they get into the downstream section. They get back in the Columbia River eventually, and partly they get there because the Nez Perce taught them how to build a new kind of boat. When they were shooting down the rapids, they came to a place where none of the indigenous tribes would ever take their canoes because they didn't think any human could do it. These dudes were just like, giddy up, we're going. And all the native tribes gathered on the side of the river, like, okay, bring it on. They're thinking these white dudes are going to topple over and we're going to scramble and get all their stuff and we're going to be rich. And those dudes shot that river like the indigenous tribes had never seen. They were great at what they did. They were experts. This was their superpower. So go back to when they finally are told, hey, there's mountains ahead of you. it's a really bad day. Not only are you going to have to drop your canoes that you built with your bare hands, as a matter of fact, we might need to burn them because it's August and there's snow on the mountains. They can't even imagine that. But you're going to lose your identity. You're no longer an expert water navigator. You're now just a dude who carries luggage. When I first went back to Fuller as the new VP, one of the most interesting things was all of a sudden I was in faculty meetings with a bunch of my old professors. It had been 20 years. It was fun. I was so excited to be back there. And I walked up to one of them and went, look who's back. kind of like, ah. And she looked at me and she said, so you're the reason I'm an elective. You're the reason I'm an elective. I'm an elective. Well, what had happened is they had restructured the curriculum, and her field became an elective. The interesting part about her is she was a legend. Literally, the Los Angeles Times wrote about her as a Jesus with a Genius grant. I mean, she had an article about her. She was a legend. She hadn't taught anything but electives in about 20 years. You couldn't just get into her class. But the fact that her field now was no longer required, she felt marginalized. I'm an elective. That's the experience that so many people have when you take them through adaptive leadership. Not only does it require learning, but it results in loss. Heifetz and Linsky have said, people don't resist change, they resist loss. And when I spent some time with Marty Linsky, he actually happened to live in New York around the corner from where I was, so I got a chance to get to know him a little bit. And he was incredibly gracious. And he's not religious at all. Literally, he said to me once, why do religious folks want to read my book on adaptive leadership? I don't get it. He's a politician guy, a government guy. He's been in governments. And I told him last year I was working, I'm about to leave on Monday for Australia for the third time this year. I've been in Australia for 3 times this year. He was working in Gaza and Jerusalem. That's where he works on adaptive leadership and loss, right? I said, Marty, if there's anything I could say to religious leaders about your adaptive work that maybe you're afraid I'm not saying, what should I say? He said, Tod, it's always about loss. So let me approach this afternoon from 2 points of view. One point of view is we're good at loss. We've been trained at loss. I know even some of you are handling it right now. I always say this, if we were standing right here, sitting in the middle of this, and someone screeched into this parking lot and came running in this door and said, oh my gosh, a little kid just got backed over by a car and it does not look good. Almost anybody in this room could jump up, go out there and know exactly what to do. Yes, we'll make sure the paramedics come, and yes, we'll make sure that, but if there was a grieving parent out there, you would know what to do. We know what to do. We've been trained for it. I was 26 years old. I was doing my clinical pastoral education in a hospital. I had 3 people die on the same day. The first person who died was a 26-year-old, my age, who was dying of AIDS. And I sat with his mother, who was sitting there at his bedside with the Bible open, whispering to him, it's time for you to go, honey. Go be with Jesus. Jesus loves you and knows you is welcoming you. It's time for you to go. You can go, honey. Let go, let go, let go, let go. Until the monitor went flat, and she screamed, come back. I'm not ready for you to go. 2 years later, 28 years old, I buried a 3-year-old in a grave. He was killed by his gang member father, beaten to death. And a year later, his mother in the same grave. The grief of losing her child caused her lupus to get inflamed, and she died. I tell you these stories because we've all have stories we could tell like this. We've all been through this. 32 years old, I watched one of my elders died, slipped out of bed in the middle of the night. I had to put his body back into bed, go wake up his children and tell them their daddy died. We get trained at helping people deal with loss. We were never trained on helping a system deal with loss, especially losses they're going to have to choose. Somebody said to me, Tod, I'm really good at caring for people, but I'm not the person who backs over the kid in the car. And at church, that's the way they think of me. Like I'm backing over their church in the car. It's different, but it's true. And what most of us learned along the way is because the losses are real and because the choices are hard and because we want to keep as much trust as possible, what most of us learned is the most basic act of leadership, the most basic discernment is, as ever possible, try to get to a win-win solution. I always say the first leadership book almost everybody was given was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was given to you right after you weren't very effective at something and somebody slipped it into your box or sent it to you. And one of the things, you may not remember any of the other 7 habits, but everybody remembers think win-win. And if it's possible, think win-win. And on technical solutions, you can think win-win. If the answer is, hey, we have to use this event, this space for a couple of different things, let's get together and figure out what a win-win is. But the problem is most of us think win-win because what we can't tolerate is the disappointment of someone who feels like they've lost. And in adaptive leadership, someone's always experiencing loss. You can't decide to both be a canoeer and a mountain explorer. You have to choose. You can't keep canoeing and keep going forward. The environment is different. And so because of that, you have to actually think beyond how can I make everybody happy? And if I can't make everybody happy, then I think, well, what I really need to do is make the most important people happy. So tell me who are the most important stakeholders? The great-grandmother who's been here forever, the biggest donor, the family that is the mover shakers, the church secretary that I inherited because she just won't leave and she's been here for three pastors, right? We think as long as we make people happy and we have trust, we'll win. Heifetz and Linsky are really clear. Win-win is lose-lose. Marty, they said, when we hear someone talk about win-wins, we wonder whether anything really lasting is going to change. And the reason for this is because at the heart of adaptive challenges, the very center of it, along with learning and loss, is what's called navigating competing values. And that's really what we're doing. We're navigating competing values. And to do this with any honesty, you've got to acknowledge that both of the values, or all the values we're navigating, are valuable. You can't set up a false dichotomy, right? We'll talk a lot about naming and navigating competing values. And it doesn't do you any good to say, well, see, our competing values are we going to be, on one side, it's the self-indulgent consumptionism of capitalistic society, and the other side, it's like abandoning all to follow Jesus, right? Like, it's not setting up a false dichotomy. It's actually thinking of much more profoundly, like, is our church going to be a place where the people who come here feel like they have a deep sense of community, that they are going to be known for who they are and loved for who they are? Or is it going to be a place that keeps opening ourselves up to other people who don't have a place? Well, we can do both, not usually very well. It might be that it's not 0-1, it might be 1-2. It might even be 1-1A. It might be today we're doing this because yesterday we did that. You know, can we have a small, effective leadership team that makes decisions quickly so we can respond to it? Or do we need a lot of voices at the table to make sure everybody's heard? Pick. And I can't tell you how many leaders think they can have a lot of voices at the table and make quick decisions. You realize that so many of these things are genuinely competing values. And the way we know we're dealing with truly adaptive challenges is that you find yourself in that place where you have to make a decision. Something is 1 and something is 2. Something's 1, something's 1A. Something is today because yesterday it was that. And people are going to experience that as loss. Oh, you're the reason I'm an elective. Oh, it doesn't feel like my home church anymore. Oh, we're going to be open to these folks and we're going to make sure that they are welcome, but what about those of us who've been here forever? Oh. It's really hard, and we always seem like what we want to do is figure out the easy way through, and it just doesn't happen. So how do you navigate competing values? And the clearest way to navigate competing values is to believe that when you have to make a decision between competing values, the most important thing to recognize is the mission always wins. The mission. Not the pastor, not the bishop, not the donor, not the new people, not the old people, not the old guard, not the people who've been here forever. The mission always wins. And that our job as leadership is to support the mission. There's a foundation actually in Texas that I spent some time working with, and they actually said, to understand this, we started telling people that we give money to, our client is your mission statement. Not your person's, it's your mission statement. The mission always wins. So what we want to talk about is how you navigate competing values is getting really clear on that. So I want to talk a little bit about mission statements. And talking about mission statements is a little bit like talking about values. Almost every church I know has a mission statement. And what I want you to do is have you rethink what I mean by mission statement. So let me give you a couple of examples just to set it up. Here's an example of one mission statement of a famous company, internationally renowned. And I want you just to think if you can figure out who it is. I blanked out a couple words. See if you can figure out whose mission statement this is. Blank Incorporated provides its customers with quality blank products and the expertise required for making informed buying decisions. We provide our products and services with a dedication to the highest degree of integrity and quality of customer satisfaction. Developing long-term professional relationships with employees that develop pride, creating a stable working environment and a company spirit. Anybody know which company this is? Who is it? Walmart? Who is this? Best Buy? Amazon? Anybody else? General Motors? Yeah, it's Dunder Mifflin. Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm making fun of this, but how many mission statements sound like this, right? They could be, somebody said it could be anybody, right? And this is what happens. In almost every church, there's a version of this, right? What did we do? We know Jesus and make Jesus known. We create manifold disciples for the changing the world. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. There's also nothing very true about it. A mission statement is a tool, not a t-shirt. It is a tool with a very specific deliverable. What you need is a mission statement that is a tool, for, why is this not doing this? This should come up, I don't know, here we go. It's not a motto, it's a statement of our shared calling. It's why we exist, of who we are. It is not a branding document. When we start having conversations about mission statements, people are always like, well, what's this going to communicate to our community? At the moment, I do not care, because it has one specific thing. It is about making decisions. Your mission statement is your tool to make decisions, especially to make decisions when you're navigating competing values. So the way I talk about this is when you think decision, think incision. If I need to make a sharp cut that is going to be painful, because I'm going to have to cut something away, I always say, you haven't had to make a decision until you have to also say no to something. And when we coach people, we do this all the time. We teach our coaches, at the end of a conversation where we talk about all these things you're going to do, the last question you have to ask is, so what are you not going to do this? And I can't tell you how many leaders say, well, I think I can just do this too, right? I can keep trying harder. I don't have any confidence that anything important is going to happen. I can't even we're working with an international agency, and I couldn't get the vice president who hired us to tell everybody on the team that they could prioritize this. Like, somebody said, so if I need to cancel other meetings, can I do so? And they went, well, I hope you'll work it out. I went, we're never going to get it done. You cannot say this is the most important thing and then not make it the most important thing. You've got to decide. And I said, and we'll get it done in 6 months. You'll be done in 6 months. But in the next 6 months, we need you to be willing to change your travel, change your plans, disappoint people, rearrange, put a program on hold. What are you going to stop doing? The mission statement is the way you decide. And the mission statement is that kind of purpose statement. Now, the way we do this, and I'm just going to show you really quickly, and if you want to go home and do this, again, what I'm trying to do is give you some tools, right? So the first thing you do is start figuring out what kind of problem you have. And the second thing you do is you start getting clear on what's our charism and what's our pain points. And this one is where you identify that when we get clear on these competing values we're going to face, especially around losses, the tool we have is a sharp mission statement to be a tool to help us make the decision. So we learned from this group called the Malago Foundation. They have an exercise, and it's a powerful exercise. I just did it with we do it all the time. We got coaches who do it. We can teach you how to do it. We give you a book that can do it. You can do it yourself, and if you want one of our people to help you, we can. You get 8 words. That's it. Write a mission statement in 8 words, and it has to have this form: verb, target, impact. So, like, to give you some examples, one of Malago Foundation has this one: eradicate malaria in rural Africa. Okay, so who's our target? Rural Africa. Do you work in Nairobi? No. Do you work in Spain? No. What about the malaria outbreak that happened in the Middle East? No. Wait a minute, what about guinea worm? No, that's the Carter Foundation. They work on the guinea worm, we work on malaria. So what are we going to do? We're going to not stop until we eradicate it. That's the verb. Save endangered species from extinction, same kind of thing, right? This is actually, the third one is one that I worked with a group. There was a church that said, we've got a capital campaign, we set aside some money, we'd like to do something in our community, and they started dreaming about what they could do in the community, and they came up with lots of ideas. They started where many people start. What do you dream God could do from us? And people said stuff like, we should have a feeding program, or we should have a housing shelter, or we should do, and they started having all these dreams, and they decided that they would go and talk to people in the community, and what they came back with is, we have all those things in this community. Fuller had a feeding program for years. We used to have a feeding program where you could come and get food, giveaway boxes and stuff. It was originally done for our international students who, when they first came so poor from other parts of the world that they couldn't even afford the groceries in California. So we had a feeding program. And after a while, more of our international students came from mission agencies that supported them. So our students didn't need it, so we just turned it open to the community. And for the longest time, we had this feeding program until finally the city of Pasadena came and said, we don't really need it. We actually don't need your feeding program. We got plenty. And matter of fact, yours is kind of causing problems. It's the wrong time of the week, and it causes traffic issues. And would you be willing to not do it? So my friend was responsible for killing the feeding program. Well, that made people really upset. Like, how can we care for poor? It's not our mission. We're a seminary. This group basically sat down and said, nobody in town wants us to start a new feeding program, a new housing mostly. So we said, what is your problem? What is your pain point? And this is the pain point. We can't get enough volunteers. So this group said, this is what we'll be about. It's not nearly as sexy as feeding people or gathering stuff in, but we'll be the group that goes to all the churches and says, we will get volunteers to put into these community organizations. So our mission is supporting local providers who are serving our communities vulnerable. We don't work with the poor. We work with the providers of the poor. That's our target. Creating a welcoming space for seekers to encounter God. The church that I was working with, they actually just changed this to cultivating a space for seekers to encounter God in New York City. And cultivating became important. Inviting thoughtful seekers to intergenerational community and discipleship. This is actually a church that I go to in Pasadena, that I've been to in Pasadena. This little church, Knox Presbyterian, is right by Caltech. So have you ever seen Big Bang Theory? Those are the people who show up at this church. They literally are rocket scientists. And if they're not them, they are faculty from Fuller Seminary. So this is a church where everybody in the room has like a master's degree or a PhD. As my wife, the artist who has a master's degree, says, this is a church for nerds. Like, we are like a nerdy group of people. We say we want to be welcoming to everyone. But our charism is not everyone. We're not everybody's cup of sunshine. We're for all the nerdy people. Like literally, the woman doing a children's message starts her children's message because she is a rocket scientist with, hey kids, how many of you know what photosynthesis is? She doesn't start with Jesus. She started with photosynthesis, right? Because that's who we are. Beth and I invited a group of young adults to our house for dinner because our charism is hospitality. And we invited my nephew and his wife. My nephew is a firefighter. He's got a bachelor's degree, but he's an EMT. and his wife is in marketing. They both have college degrees, and they were trying to find a new church home. And we said, we'd love you to come to our church, so let's introduce you to some young adults. They came to our dinner. At the end of dinner, my nephew looks at me and says, Uncle Tod, thanks so much for inviting us, but we're really probably not going to come back. I said, yeah, I had a hunch that maybe this wasn't your type of people. He goes, look, I just can't be part of a church where every small group people are doing math. You see, in the middle of dinner, two guys broke out into an argument over whether or not they had the technology to invent a real-life lightsaber. And when the argument got to an impasse, they broke out yellow pads and started doing math. That's the church, right? So when we started talking about who we are and what our charism is, and because of our charism, what pain point we could offer in the world, and then what our mission would be, we didn't say we're a church for nerds. But we reframed it as we're going to invite thoughtful seekers. And their pain point is many of these geniuses feel like they are alone. And especially when they start exploring faith. They need a place where they can explore faith in community and be willing to deepen their faith. And that became our mission statement, inviting thoughtful seekers to intergenerational community and discipleship. Help our diverse community follow Jesus and bless the world. Help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. That's 7 words. It's my company. We're showing off, right? That's what we do. We help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. So people come to us and they say stuff like, my gosh, you guys are really good at conflict and, that whole heating thing. Could you help us in conflict resolution? No, we actually don't do conflict resolution. There's other people who do that really well. When you learn tools of conflict resolution and you want to do better at than leading, we will help you with that. Oh my gosh, you've worked with churches in crisis. Yes, we have. Would you help ours? A famous ministry that came and said, we were trying to figure out a way to go through this crisis without having to fire our founder. They told me 3 minutes worth of stuff, and I said, no, you need a lawyer. I said, you call us after you fire your founder, because he's probably not going to make it out of this. When you need to rebuild your future, then you call us. That's what we do. We help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. People have come to us and said, would you do search for us? We need pastors and leaders who have adaptive capacity. Search is a big business. You can make a lot of money. And I have to admit, if I was 40, I might take that one on just for the fun of it. But I'm not. I'm 61, and we're going to be focused on what we do. So we go, no, we won't. We do a lot of work with churches in transition, and we set them up and say, now if you want to call a search team, now you have the clear understanding of who you are. It's because that's who we are, verb, target, impact. So when we do this, we have an entire process, and we can show you that process along the way. It's in the book and stuff. But here's a way you can start thinking about it even now. If you want to start this conversation, you can certainly get the book and work it through, or you can have somebody help you. But the key thing to start with is this. Don't start with what you're going to do. Start with the who. The center of the target is the who. That's like going back to the pain point. Who are the people we're going to call? Who are the people we're going to care for? That little church in Pasadena said, you know who we are? We are for the people who go to Caltech, the people who end up, these educated folks who their education gets in the way of their relationships, their sense of community. That's who breaks our heart. That's who we are. That's what we're about. There's a Methodist church I know in San Diego. I've never worked with them. I visited them, and I walked in on Easter Sunday, and it was stunning. It was this Easter Sunday service, little tiny church in a little section of San Diego, Methodist church. I walked in. The first thing I noticed is that they have a map on the wall of their neighborhood, just of their neighborhood. They'd done a map, and they've asked everybody in the community of the church to come in and draw on the map your favorite place in the neighborhood. Here's my favorite dry cleaners. Here's my favorite restaurant. And everybody is putting notes. So it's like a community-built map of the neighborhood. They're literally, who are we for? We're for this neighborhood. And they said, and because this neighborhood is right in the middle of another larger area where there's a conservative Christian college, we are the church for this neighborhood for people who don't feel comfortable at this conservative Christian college. They will go, they're our friends. We understand them. We get them. But they are not inclusive of LGBTQ people, and we are. And you could argue back and forth about whether they should be or shouldn't be or what you believe about that, but for them, they're really clear. If you ask them what they're about, we are about LGBTQ people who live in this neighborhood. Because that's who we're called to serve, and it's clear. And they're okay with it. And if you're not, they're okay with that too. Like, this is who we're called to. That sense of the center of the target is where we have to get defined. I did this work with a large Texas conservative church, and when we were working out the center of their target, they said this church has always been, this church started with 8 families in a living room. Now it's 8,000. They'd gone through a big crisis. They had to fire their founder. They came back and they asked me to work with their new next generation leaders. They were trying to recover their sense of their charism and their mission. And they came back and said, our charism has always been, we as a church we're started for like parents wanting to learn how to raise their children. We've always been about the next generation. We've always had youth ministry. So they said the center of our target is we're going to be about the next generation. That's who we are. We're about the next generation. And immediately someone said, if we make that the center of our target, what are we saying to all the older people here? Like, we're leaving them out. Like, we can't be that. What we have to do is we got to make the target bigger. We got to say it's for every generation. And a 68-year-old man said, no. The reason why I'm here and the reason why my friends are here is we want to be part of a church that is for the next generation. In other words, they were saying, I'm not the target, I'm the arrow. And some of us need to get really clear on the difference between being the target and the arrow. Like, he goes, I believe that we've been called by God to be in a church that is about the next generation. That's who we are. That's why we're here. We're the arrow, not the target. The center of the target is who's breaking our heart, the pain point that's ours. Start with that. And I guarantee you that alone is going to be a hard conversation. And that alone will begin to say, you'll be saying to people, competing values. So you're not the center of the target. You might be the next ring out. You're still on the target. You're important to us. But you're not the center. I had a couple come and visit me at the church. We were going through this season where we were beginning to grow and we were doing well. And this older couple came and joined our church. And they're the kind of couple that you've ever had this where all of a sudden somebody shows up and it feels like wherever they go, there's like light following them. Like they just, boom, like they were just, they're volunteering. Boom, they're in Sunday school. Boom, they're telling you how much they appreciate the church and the pastor. And everybody's like, hey, have you seen this couple? They're amazing. They're great. And my business manager come to me and goes, and I think he must have done well in life, and I'm pretty sure they tithe because, that thing is, boom, it's helping there too. Like, it's just great. And somebody came to me and said, I heard they're going to join the church. They're going through the new member class. And literally, I had an elder in the church walk up to me, put his arm around me, and goes, this is why your leadership is important here. You attract people like this. This is so great. And I went, that's a good day. We're doing great. This is awesome. And then I saw on my calendar that the new member class was the following Sunday, and before the new member class, they wanted to make sure they had an appointment with me. I usually know what that means. I have to answer all their questions about becoming Presbyterians. So they showed up and said, before we go through the class, we got some questions we want to ask. And I said, okay, please tell me what the questions you are. And they said, well, we're just trying to figure out what it means to be Presbyterians. We've never been part of a Presbyterian church before. We've always been part of like non-denominational, larger. We helped start 3 of the mega churches around here. Oh, that tells you something. I said, well, how'd you get here? They said, well, one of the mega churches that we were part of, it started growing, and we had a falling out with the pastor. Okay, that tells you something about them too, right? And so they know personally a famous pastor that I've never even met. And they said, but we didn't know where to go, and we were stuck. And somebody told us, hey, what are you going to do to nurture your faith while you're in between looking for a church? And we started going on this podcast, and we heard this guy preaching, and he really inspired us, and he was amazing. And he was he was stunning. It just rekindled within us a love for the scriptures and really a love for mission. And we just were so captivated. But he's on a podcast, and he's across the country, and we couldn't go there. But we looked up and found out he was a Presbyterian. And so we thought, okay, we're going to find a Presbyterian church. So we came to your church. And you're not as good as him, but it's good, right? So we've loved it, and we've loved it here, and we jumped in, and we hear some similar things about that, and we've been thrilled to be here. And I go, great, so what's the problem? He goes, well, when we told our friends we were going to join here, they told us there's different types of Presbyterians. I said, oh, yeah, there are different types of Presbyterians. I said, so we realized the church we were listening to is a different type of Presbyterian than you are. I said, who are you listening to? They said, Tim Keller. I said, well, yeah, he's a once-in-a-generation genius, right? And he's a PCA Presbyterian, and we're PCUSA Presbyterians, and you're not going to know the difference, but there's some pretty big differences between us. And they said, I know, I'm sure there is, but here, you're all Christians, right? I said, yes, we're Christians. They said, so here's the question. We were wondering, between now and Sunday, could you all become PCA Presbyterians? And I'm like, you really don't understand anything about Presbyterians, do you? Like, you don't even understand denominational processes. You can't just decide to change the initials on the door in 3 days. That ain't going to happen. They had no idea. They thought this was just something simple that they could encourage. And I said, no, this isn't going to happen. And they said, yeah, but for a bunch of people like us, I mean, we did our research. We're going to be more comfortable being in that kind of Presbyterian church than your kind of Presbyterian church. And I said, and I know. And here's that moment. I'm thinking, okay, now the elders who said positive, next week they're going to hear that I said this. Because it's true. I got to say it. Which is, you're not our mission. We don't exist to create a church for people to find a church that they're completely comfortable with. And I watched that look on their face, and I thought to myself, well, that was fun while it lasted. Hopefully the budget won't take too big a hit. I said, but maybe God brought you here to join our mission. Maybe they're the arrow and not the target. And I remember he startled and looked up and looked at his wife and said, honey, I think we're Presbyterians. And they joined our church. I tell you so many negative stories all the time that are always so filled with loss, but I want you to realize there's something very energizing about saying to people, it's not about you. It's about something bigger than you. And then think about the impact you want to make. What's the difference we want to make? For our company, our difference is really, really clear. We want faith leaders like you to thrive as change leaders. We care about you. We say to our clients all the time, our goal is not just, I can't promise you can accomplish the change you want to accomplish. Systems are much bigger than individuals. But what I promise you is we're going to do everything we can so that you can thrive in that process. What's the difference you want to make? What's the impact you want to accomplish? And then get clear on the verb. And if you talk to anybody on my staff, they will tease me because they know I hate our verb. We help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. We help. Yawn. I want to catalyze. I want to inspire. I want to mobilize. Nope. That's not what we do. We help. So what we often do is we look up, we show up and go, is there anything we can do to help? How do we help you with your problem? We can't even bring your change to you. You have to do it. How do we help? What's the primary activity? We got clients who say our primary activity is we inspire. That church, the Next Generation Church, they said we inspire the next generation to deeply follow Jesus. And they're an inspirational church. They got all the things that makes you think about inspiration. We think we're not very inspiring, we help. Other people equip or catalyze or mobilize or eradicate or whatever it is. And if you work on each of these words, what you'll find out is that working through each of these words makes you ask really clear questions about who we are really and what we're called to do. And by the time you're finished with this work, and it's work, what usually happens is it lands right in the middle with a sense of, yeah, that's ours. That's ours to do. That's why we exist. That's what we're about. And so every time we have to make a decision, we ask ourselves, does it do that? So whenever we're making a decision for our company, we'll often say, does it help faith leaders thrive as change leaders? And people say, look at faith leaders. That's the target. It's not churches. It's not universities, not educators. And people say, well, they have to be people of faith. The center of the target are people of faith. Just last week, I had someone who runs a nonprofit say, could I use your company if I'm not a person of faith? I said, as long as you're comfortable knowing that we start with the notion that people of faith have something really important to preserve, that's one of the gifts we bring, we're going to ask you the same questions about what your values are and what you preserve. As long as it's about your values, you'll probably like us. but you may or may not agree with our faith tradition at all. And it doesn't matter that my team comes from varieties of faith traditions, right? Because this is what we do. We help faith leaders thrive as change leaders. Once you have the 8 words down, then you can ask yourself some really interesting questions. Like, would it help us cut our budget by 40%? I always use 40% because you can't exactly belt tighten to get to 40%. You know this. I mean, all of us know this, right? Most all of our budgets are about somewhere between 60 and 80% people. You got to cut your budget by 40%. It's people. So this was really important when we went in 2008, when we went through the economic crisis in my community. So we're in Southern California. You know, the 2008 economic crisis started in Southern California. That's where all those crazy mortgage things happened that set it all off. So by 2007, we were experiencing it. By 2008, we were in a full-blown crisis. And I knew a lot of church leaders who were saying stuff like, we're going to do a 10% across-the-board cut. We're just all going to take a haircut, and we're all going to bear the pain together. We couldn't. We knew this is massive. So we started saying, if we have to cut the budget this deeply, what are we going to prioritize? And we didn't say, last hired, first fired, because our mission was the most important thing. So we had to make really hard decisions. Like we let go a 28-year-old who was helping us with young adults because there were other churches in the community better with young adults than we were. And we let go a 63-year-old choir director. Because at one time, this was a church that could afford a full-time choir director, and now we weren't. And we realized that after years of working really hard because we love him, and we tried to find many different jobs for him to do, and we finally realized we need a part-time choir director, and we don't need some of the other ministries. And so you can either be our part-time choir director or you're going to have to leave. And he said, I can't afford to live part-time. And we gave him the biggest severance we've given anybody. He got more money when he left than I got after leaving the church. We did it intentionally. It was painful. And I had people walking up to me. One man walked up to me and said, my father worked for J.C. Penney's. And they let him go when he was 63. And I remember thinking they couldn't have waited 2 more years. They couldn't have just held him out for 2 more years. I have not walked into a J.C. Penney since then. How do I come to church next week if that's what we're going to be about? It's painful, excruciating. And I've been on both sides of those things. I actually worked myself out of a job at Fuller because we said, this is our mission. This is our mission statement. And it's no longer, you don't need someone like me to lead change now that want somebody to administrate it. You want a better administrator. That's not what I'm called to do. There will be casualties whenever we do this work. And most of the time, we're so busy pleasing people that we end up jaggedly tearing things apart rather than making slices that, though painful, can heal. A mission statement helps you do that. For most of us, when you start asking these questions, does it help us cut our budget by 40% if we had to? Is it us? Is it what's unique about us? Right? Can we say that because we do this, we're different than this? And what you start realizing is that very quickly it gives you the tool you need to be able to make these hard adaptive challenges. But if you don't have it, it's really hard. It becomes about power. So a sharp mission statement. A mission statement that is short and concise, that helps you make decisions, that clarifies what we do and what we won't do, and helps us then determine what we'll cut out. And then once you've decided, stack hands on it. Get really clear. This is the card that wins the hand. This is the distinction. This is the difference. When you're making a decision, put everything through the mission statement. Does it do this? Does it do this? Does it do this? And if it doesn't, maybe it's still on the target, but it's not the center. And if we have to decide, we're coming back to the center. The reset is that the mission always wins. Not the stakeholders, not ourselves, the mission.